In the summer of 1815, months after the eruption of Mount Tambora darkened skies across continents, the small settlement of Blackridge Hollow lay under a heavy, unnatural twilight that clung to the streets even at midday. The air carried a metallic chill, the kind that made the wooden houses groan, and the lantern flames struggled to stay upright in the wind. Ash fell like pale snowflakes coating rooftops, fences, and the narrow dirt path that wound toward the town's center. Farmers whispered that the sun had grown sick, its light weak and thin, unable to warm the soil. Birds abandoned their nests, livestock paced restlessly, and every evening a strange orange haze settled over the valley, turning the quiet village into a place that felt suspended between seasons, between life and something else. Despite the unnatural weather, the villagers tried to continue their routines, though each day felt heavier and more suffocating than the one before. On August 3, 1815, just after dawn, the ashfall briefly stopped, revealing the old community lodge near the edge of town, its windows fogged from the cold inside. This building, normally a gathering place for travelers and townsfolk, had become dim and almost unwelcoming in the strange post-eruption gloom. It was here that the townspeople first realized something was terribly wrong. The victim, a 19-year-old messenger named Elias Ward, had been scheduled to deliver letters to neighboring villages. Known for his reliability and cheerful nature, Elias always left before sunrise. When his horse was found tethered outside the lodge, untouched and trembling, concern swept through the settlement. A neighbor, Ruthendale Smith, checked the lodge interior around 06:15, expecting to find Elias preparing his route. Instead, she found the main hall empty, the fireplace cold, and a faint trail of disturbed ash leading toward the back corridor. His travel satchel lay open on a wooden table, letters still sealed inside. His coat hung neatly on a peg, as if he had merely stepped away for a moment. But Elias himself had vanished without a sound. In a building with locked doors and windows sealed shut against the cold, the moment of discovery left Ruthendale frozen. She later described the silence of the lodge as unnatural, like the building was holding its breath. She recalled calling Elias's name, her voice echoing back at her with no reply. As she followed the faint ash trail toward the back room, she felt an overwhelming pressure in her chest, the same suffocating heaviness that had plagued the town since the eruption. The back room door was slightly ajar, swaying gently as if someone had passed through moments earlier, though the air around it was completely still. Ruthendale pushed it open, expecting Elias to appear, perhaps injured or asleep. Instead, the room was empty, untouched, cold, and silent, except for the steady drip of melting frost along the windowpane. Fear took hold of her as she ran outside, shouting for help. Her hands shaking so violently, she struggled to form words. The townspeople gathered quickly, their faces pale in the dim, ash-filtered light, each person realizing that whatever strange force had lingered over Blackridge Hollow since Tambora erupted had finally reached into their lives. Elias Ward's disappearance marked the beginning of a chilling mystery the settlement would never forget. The investigation into Elias Ward's disappearance officially began on the morning of August 3, 1815, shortly after townspeople confirmed the lodge was locked from the inside and the faint ash trail leading toward the back room did not match Elias's own footprints. Constable Harron Doyle first documented the scene, noting the horse found tethered outside, the untouched letters inside the satchel, and the unusual coldness inside the lodge, despite the fireplace being unused. Witness statements were collected in chronological order. Ruthendale Smith was the last to search for him at 06:15. Samuel Reed had seen Elias the previous evening near the stable, and an elderly villager claimed to hear a faint thud around dawn, though he could not determine its direction. Physical evidence was limited. No blood, no discarded clothing, no signs of forced entry. The ash trail inside the lodge appeared as a sequence of light, smudges rather than footsteps, as if someone had carried the ash rather than walked through it. The constable recorded this in his log at 0740, describing it as unnatural, dispersal, a deeper sweep of the lodge uncovered frost buildup. On the inside of the back, window, unusual for summer even during Tambora's cooling effects, along with a single indentation on the wooden floor near the window, too shallow to match a boot print. As investigators moved to map the sequence of events, their greatest challenge quickly became the lack of reliable lighting and the cold dimness caused by the volcanic ash cloud overhead. Lantern flames behaved unpredictably, flickering even without wind, and several officers reported feeling disoriented in the poorly lit back corridor. The town's narrow paths were slippery with ash, turning every alley into a potential dead end. Efforts to track Elias's possible escape or abduction route were repeatedly hindered by shifting ash patterns. Prints would disappear within hours or merge with new wind-blown layers. Investigators canvassed households, questioned traders and inspected barns, yet each search yielded nothing but the same eerie signs of a town numbed by climate and fear. The detectives described the atmosphere as suffocating. Every door creaked, every lantern hissed, and the unusual cold made the search feel more like a winter graveyard investigation than a summer inquiry. Constable Doyle wrote that even the horses seemed disturbed. They refused to approach the lodge's rear wall. As the investigation expanded into remote areas, officers faced additional obstacles: sudden temperature drops, dense fog caused by ash mixing with morning moisture, and the eerie silence of forests where birds had vanished. Tracks discovered near the riverbank initially sparked hope, but they turned out to be distorted hoof marks shaped by ash and melting frost. Despite long hours, the lack of technological tools left the detectives working with their intuition and lantern light alone. As the fruitless search stretched into the second day, emotional strain deepened. Elias's mother, Mara Ward, arrived at the lodge carrying the small silver pendant her son wore since childhood, begging investigators to find him quickly because he feared the cold more than anything. Some officers avoided her gaze, unable to offer reassurance. One young detective, barely 20, confessed that hearing her cries made him question whether the boy was still alive or lost somewhere in the shifting fog that blanketed the valley. The emotional pressure hardened into desperation as townspeople gathered outside the lodge, whispering prayers, rumors, and fears that whatever force had darkened the skies might have taken Elias as well. By nightfall, Constable Doyle wrote that the case felt as if the earth swallowed him whole, and the investigation entered its most unsettling phase, searching for someone who left no trace in a world already erased by ash. Elias Ward's disappearance spread through Black Ridge Hollow faster than the cold ash-filled winds, and within a day the settlement dissolved into a mixture of fear, superstition, and rising anger. Parents refused to let their children leave home, claiming that whatever swallowed the sunlight had now taken one of their own. Rumors circulated that the eruption's darkness carried a curse, while others insisted a human culprit lurked in the shadows. The local newspaper, desperate for readership, printed a sensational headline declaring Elias the first victim of the ash season, which only fueled panic as townspeople imagined that more vanishings would follow. Crowds gathered near the lodge each morning, whispering theories, arguing about who might be responsible, and blaming constables for failing to control the chaos. Fear turned into frustration, and small fights broke out in the square as suspicion shifted wildly from neighbor to stranger. By the end of the second week, the community's collective anxiety became a form of hysteria. Some claimed to witness figures moving through the ash at night, while others reported strange knocks on their doors, convinced Elias's disappearance was part of a larger unseen threat. These fears shaped the narrative long before the law ever produced evidence. As investigators evaluated potential suspects, they faced not only the lack of forensic tools, but also the flood of unreliable reports generated by terrified citizens. The most frequently discussed suspect was a reclusive farmer named Alden Gray, known for living alone near the forest edge. Some villagers insisted they saw strange lights near his property at night, and others argued that Alden's knowledge of the woods gave him the ability to hide a body. Legally, however, the constables could not detain him without tangible proof. Alden's biography offered little. A widower with no history of violence, surviving quietly off the land. Another proposed suspect was a traveling merchant seen leaving the village earlier, the same morning, but investigators learned he departed before Elias was last seen. Yet the lack of solid evidence frustrated both lawmen and townspeople. Attempts to construct a legal case ran into constant barriers. The lodge revealed no fingerprints, no footprints, and no break-ins, leaving the law with nothing more than speculation. Even the shallow indentation on the lodge's floor was inconclusive, offering no legal path toward prosecution. This evidentiary void created the impression that someone or something had acted beyond human logic, deepening the community's crisis of trust. As public pressure intensified, the town council organized an inquiry session, turning the old community hall into a makeshift courtroom. Heavy ash filtered through cracks in the roof, drifting down like dust onto the benches where villagers sat packed together, watching every movement with tense eyes. Constable Doyle presented his findings to the magistrate, laying out the timeline, the lack of physical evidence, and the contradictory witness accounts. When Alden Gray was called forward for questioning, the hall fell silent. The atmosphere was suffocating, lanterns flickering, casting long distorted shadows across the wooden floor. Alden's hands trembled as he responded to accusations shaped more by fear than fact. Despite the hostile stares, he calmly recounted his movements on the morning of Elias's disappearance, and no legal grounds emerged to implicate him. A few villagers shouted demands for his arrest, but the magistrate reiterated that suspicion was not evidence. The interrogation ended with Alden leaving under guard, though more for his safety than due to guilt. The session closed without answers, leaving the courtroom thick with frustration. As people exited into the cold, ash-filled evening, their anger simmered into quiet resignation. The law could not solve what the earth itself seemed determined to hide, and Elias Ward's absence lingered in the air like a wound that the community had no power to heal. Elias Ward's disappearance remained unsolved, not because investigators lacked dedication, but because every layer of evidence contradicted the next, creating a maze that no modern or historical method could fully penetrate. Analysts reviewing the case decades later identified several reasons for its failure to reach a conclusion. The first was environmental. The ashfall from Tambora masked footprints, altered temperatures, and corrupted physical traces, erasing what would have been critical evidence. The second was the timeline itself. Elias vanished during a period of climate-driven fear when witness statements were shaped more by panic than reliability. Attempts to reconstruct events faced the same issue modern profiling experts note today: memory, distortion in communities under emotional strain. Contemporary analysts applying modern investigative concepts, such as geographic profiling and behavioral analysis, still found no coherent pattern. Elias had no enemies, no debts, and no clear motive for self-disappearance. Eliminating typical explanations, some have suggested accidental death followed by concealment, but the locked lodge, the untouched belongings, and the cold frost inside complicate that theory. Others proposed an abductor, yet the absence of footprints or signs of struggle undermines this. Even the shallow floor indentation discovered in the back room remains inconclusive. Modern experts argue it is too shallow to suggest force, but too distinct to be ignored. These unresolved contradictions form the backbone of why the case resists closure, deepening its classification as a locked room mystery with no satisfying resolution. As researchers revisit the final recorded moments of Elias's presence, the case becomes less a timeline and more a symbolic door, one that appears to open into deeper uncertainty the more it is studied. In dramatized retellings, historians describe the final return to the lodge by later investigators who sought one last clue to break the stalemate. They entered the building after decades of abandonment, the wooden floor warped, the windows still edged with cold residue, as if the frost had never fully melted. Lanterns illuminated dust-filled corridors where the silence felt identical to the day Elias vanished. At the back room, the investigators paused, noting that the door still swayed ever so slightly despite the still air, echoing how Ruth and Dale Smith first found it. When they reopened the case file on a nearby table, its pages yellowed but intact. The atmosphere seemed to tighten, as if the building itself resisted their attempt to resurrect the past. One of the historians remarked that reopening this metaphorical door only deepened the mystery, offering no new certainty, but reviving all the old contradictions. The empty room, unchanged after so many years, served as a physical reminder of the unsolved nature of Elias's fate. Even when ground-penetrating tools were used around the building's foundation, they revealed nothing but compacted soil and layers of ash, denying any last hope of physical discovery. The emotional toll on those obsessed with the case became its own chapter. Constable Doyle died years later, believing he had failed the community. His personal notes, discovered after his death, described recurring dreams where Elias stood just out of reach in the dim lodge corridor. Journalists who later investigated the case expressed their frustration, calling it a gravity well of unanswered questions. One reporter wrote that Elias's story haunted him because some mysteries do not resist solution, they simply lack one. This growing sense of disappointment forms the final layer of the case. The realization that closure may be impossible and that the ache of uncertainty is all the community can carry forward. The disappearance of Elias Ward stands not only as a historical enigma, but as a reflection of human helplessness when faced with an absence that refuses explanation. Dramatically, many storytellers and historians still describe the case as a door left permanently ajar, a mystery that refused to close. No matter how many times investigators revisited the lodge, even after decades passed, travelers who visited Blackridge Hollow reported that the building felt frozen in time, its air thick with the echo of unanswered questions. The final image often invoked by chroniclers is that of the lodge's back room, its window still edged with faint frost as though the moment of Elias's vanishing had never fully ended. And so the story endures not only as a historical puzzle but as a rhetorical challenge, passed from generation to generation. After all the legal debates, the forensic theories, the sociological reflections, and the emotional weight carried by the community, one question continues to hover in the cold air of Blackridge Hollow, refusing to settle like the ash that once covered the land. Tell me, who do you think was responsible?